I live at the snowy North Pole now, but my life began surrounded by sand. I was born in a country that was then called Lycia. It's since been absorbed into the nation of Turkey, which I suppose is appropriate considering what many families like to eat for their Christmas dinner. Lycia was located along the southwestern border of the land across the Mediterranean Sea from Egypt and Israel. The year of my birth is recorded as 280 A.D., or 280 years after what is now considered the official birth year of a much more important baby whose name was Jesus. Actually, records weren't kept as carefully in those days, so no one is really sure in which year Jesus was born. The main thing is, I was born about 3 centuries later in the Lycian town of Patara. Sometimes I find it odd, and other times amusing, that I know the exact details of when I came into this world, but have no idea how long I'm going to stay. Patara was a prosperous village, as villages went in those days, meaning many of the 400 people living there got enough to eat and had houses to live in. Today, my hometown would seem very primitive. No indoor bathrooms, no video games, no cars roaring up and down its streets. But everybody knew everybody else's name. My father's name was Epiphanios, and my mother was called Nona. They were quite old when I was born, probably in their 50s. People didn't live as long then as they do now, maybe to 60 if they were lucky. We didn't have much in the way of medicine, and everybody ate what they wanted without worrying about calories. Anyway, I arrived long after my parents had given up hope of having a baby. I was quite a surprise to them. They celebrated by naming me Nicholas, which means victorious. It was a name I liked very much. No one used nicknames in those days, so I was always Nicholas and never Nick or Nicky. I acquired my nicknames much later in life. We were a Christian family. As I grew up and learned more and more about my religion, one thing Jesus said always stayed with me: that we should treat other people the way we would want them to treat us. That made sense to me, even as a little boy. Other parts of being a Christian weren't as much fun. There were days you were supposed to fast, and I always liked to eat. Even goat cheese tasted good to me. One of the sadder things about living now at the North Pole is that I just can't get goat cheese anymore. Maybe a few of you listening to this program will leave me some next Christmas Eve instead of the usual cookies, though I'm certainly glad to have the cookies, especially homemade chocolate chip, if anyone's taking notes. I was given a good education, by which I mean I was taught to read and write Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. There were a lot of languages because we lived in what was called a melting pot, or a place through which people of all different countries and races might pass. If, by chance, someone came to our family inn and spoke only Hebrew, he might go on to the next town and the next inn if we weren't able to answer back in Hebrew. Being able to read and write in several languages made me something of a scholar. There wasn't any formal schooling then. Boys learned as much as their parents wanted them to. Girls, I'm sorry to say, were seldom allowed to go to school at all. People thought they were only suited to stay home, keep house, and someday raise children of their own. I'm glad people finally learned better, although it took much too long. I hope my wife Layla will be pleased I mentioned this so early in my program. It was always an important point to her, as you'll learn when I get to the part of my story about when I met her. But that's 100 years after the time we're talking about now. My parents guessed they wouldn't live long enough to see me grow up, and they were right. They died peacefully during the year I was 9, my father first and my mother a few months later. I loved them very much and grieved over their loss. I believed in heaven, and felt they'd gone to live with Jesus. But I wished they could have gone on living with me. All these centuries later, I remember them very well. As long as people are remembered by someone, they're never completely gone. My parents were generous people, and I'm sure that somewhere they've enjoyed watching their son go on to such an unexpected and long career.